Hi, I'm Mike Conlon, your host of the Weiser Books Radio Hour. Today's guest is Annwyn Avalon, Water Priestess, and author of Water Witchcraft. Her most recent book, Way of the Water Priestess, published with us January 1. Welcome to the show, Annwyn.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you on again. We were discussing beforehand, and we both kind of couldn't remember if we had or hadn't, but you reminded me that we had already done an interview for Water Priestess. So thank you very much for that. It was about a year ago, and obviously this year has been crazy, so things go by the wayside that way. Anyway, welcome back to the show. We really appreciate you being back on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
All right, so tell me, the new book is The Way of the Water Priestess. The other book you did was Water Witchcraft. What is the biggest difference between the two?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, water witchcraft focuses a lot on folk practices, a lot about the physical aspect of water, actually physically working with it, and also doing things like using shells and coral and different fossils that might be associated with the water. But we also talk a lot about how to make different types of water, charm waters, and there's a very large section, that has massive amounts of folklore on different types of water witches as well as water spirits. And that's everything from kelpies and selkies and mermaids to some of the more well known water deities and some obscure. But within Water Priestess, it is still about water, but it's a different perspective. So instead of coming to it from a folk magic perspective, it's coming to water in a place of service. And instead of looking at witches and folkloric stories about witches from antiquity, we actually go a little bit further back and start looking at sacred water tending. For the most part, it was done by women. So it is a feminine practice. However, I've written Water Priestess in a way that it's not exclusionary because we are in a very modern society where these gender roles aren't necessarily serving us anymore. However, when I was writing this book, there was just such a emphasis on the feminine water tending in antiquity, and that's what I was finding. And of course, being a woman myself, I write it from that perspective. So it comes from a very feminine perspective of sacred water tending and what that means. In antiquity, throughout time and history, there have been many different women or groups of women that are somehow associated with water in one way or another. It could be a single priestess bathing in a sacred spring before she does her oracular work, like the Oracle of Delphi, or it could be groups of women that were living together either on an island or in some sort of capacity associated with water. And then we also find the archaeological side of that, which is the water temples. And we do know that there are remnants, just little teeny bits of information that there was sacred water tending or that deity or something was worshipped in conjunction with the water. And so I take a broad look throughout history, and we look at some of the Irish the Celtic Druidesses, the Norse vulvas, and just different feminine water women throughout antiquity and what their practices were and how that can be a inspiration and framework for a modern water priestess practice where we still continue to tend the water in a very sacred way. However, antiquity and modern times are completely different. So things like giving votive offerings is not something that we can really do. Taking a car and depositing it into a lake, it's we can't do that, right? But in antiquity, that's what they were doing. They were driving chariots into a lake as offerings, or throwing in shields and swords, and those practices are they bring in this interesting element that we can learn from, but we have to adapt it into a modern practice. Now, of course, in antiquity, they weren't fighting the pollution that we are. And so there's a really big section that focuses on the sacred water tending specifically to protect and depollute, and be in service to water so that it can be held as a sacred element and respected.
One of the things you mentioned that I'm actually kind of curious about, historically, you mentioned that there were groups of women living communally. Can you give me examples of that? I'm just curious. It's one of those things where generally speaking, you hear about witches being solitary, women living off in the forest by themselves, goddesses, who are not part of a group other than a mythos, or uh, they're basically singular people. So talk to me about the communal aspect, the group aspect, in historically speaking.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. So this is actually a little bit of the focus of the book. So throughout the book, one of the things that you'll notice is that the number 3 and 9 are very, very prominent, and they're used over and over again. And the reason being is because as I was doing this research about these watery women, I was running into groups of 9 maiden. And so mythos all the way into the archaeological record. So just in North mythos, we have the 9 daughters of Ran, right? Who are the wave maidens. Then we have the 9 mill mothers. And then we have the Valkyries, but they fly in groups of 9, or they travel in groups of 9. Even in ancient Greek, there was a council of 9, though it wasn't all female. Zeus and several of the other deities were in this group of 9. But we see it a lot within the Celtic and Gaul world. And so the priestesses of the Isle of Sena, Sena, they were thought to be in groups of 9, and they also parallel a lot of the Avalonian priestess tradition and mythos, and there's some parallels throughout there. We also see the uh, the muses, as well, and there's a connection with Delphi and water practices, and so there's 2 different versions of the muses story. One of them, they are born in groups of 3. In this particular one, a Pegasus stamps his hoof into the ground, and from that a fountain flows forth, and from that the 9 muses are born. Now, it doesn't just stop there, because we also see this sacred water practice continue on into the Oracle of Delphi, who would bathe in the sacred springs before her oracular work. The temple there, of course, dedicated to Apollo and his muses. And so then the other interesting thing that I found is that Delphi, there's actually a group of academics that are doing a study on Apollo's temples and finding out how they correspond with the constellation Delphinius, or the dolphin. And so there is some preliminary evidence coming through that is saying that some of these temples, specifically Delphi, are oriented with the rising of the constellation Delphinius. And it was some research is being done, and they're still kind of pulling this forth. But what happens is they believe that when the constellation would rise, that it would let the people know that the oracle was ready for her. Of course, it's archaeological work that has conclusions that they're drawing. So, is it fact? I don't know. Are there strong conclusions to this? Yes. Then when we go back over into England, we find 9 maiden groups throughout some of the Celtic lore as well. In fact, in Scotland, there is a well that is called 9 Maidens Well. And it's specifically about this story where this man brought his daughters, and they lived in this kind of grove or valley. And I believe there was a sacred well, and they lived there, and they actually built a temple. And that's about all there is to the story. Then there's different versions of that where they got devoured by a dragon. But because of this particular story, there are 9 Maidens wells. There's multiples, but the main one is right there in Scotland, in the valley that this supposedly took place. Um, and then we go into Celtic mythos, where we have the 9 maiden of Annwn, who kindle the cauldron of rebirth. And so we see these groups over and over, not just in mythos, but within actual archaeological records as well, where there's groups, and they often were in this 9. And so this plays a really, really big part. It also, I always find it very fascinating too that there's a connection with the Pleiades and the Celtic people. And while the Pleiades are said to be the 7 sisters, if you actually look it up, there's 9 stars in the constellation that shine, that are named and that actually make that constellation. So it's nicknamed the 7 sisters, but truthfully, it's the 9 sisters. And there is a little bit of changing the numbers. So 9 seems to be this Celtic or ancient European sacred number. And then with the rise of Christianity, we start to see a lot of these 9s switch to 7s. Which is more of a Christian power number. And so that gives us a little bit of clues sometimes as well to, oh, hey, maybe there's a little bit more here. Maybe there's more to learn. So yeah, it's a strange phenomenon. And basically, I feel like it's a 10,000 piece puzzle. And I've uncovered about 1,000 pieces. And I've been able to put them together to be like, oh, this is present, and this is present, and this is present, and I can find those different pieces, and then connecting them, and that connection is fun. It's a lot of fun. Sometimes I have to look into other cultures. Sometimes I have to meditate, or sometimes I just let spirit guide me. But I'm also really good about making sure that I put what the difference is between, like, this is what I found through research and history, lore, archaeology, and this is personal gnosis. So
Got it. So one of the things, sifting through your CV, one of the things that you that we have actually in your author bio is that you have founded a witchcraft tradition in the Avalonian tradition. I'm going to give you a minute to give a shout out for that and kind of explain that. But Avalonian tradition figures into the book and the traditions as well. You mentioned specifically Morgan Le Fay,
yeah.
Morgana. I know she features prominently as a witch in literature, for good or bad, depending on which tradition you're picking up on.
Okay. And she's also she is the chief sister of one of the 9
Got it.
Avalonian priestesses. Yes.
Okay, so just my familiarity with Arthurian tradition is not as good as it should be. But one of the things that always fascinated me was the Lady of the Lake,
Yeah.
Nimue, who kind of brought the sword to Arthur. Um, and there seems to be a direct contrast between those two women in the Arthurian tradition. So, talk to me about the witchcraft tradition within the Avalonian kind of frame of things, and please talk to me about these two women heroes in Arthurian tradition.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, all of this fits together perfectly. So, um, Triskel Rose is a Avalonian witchcraft tradition. My training was in American traditional witchcraft, which basically is very similar to British folkloric witchcraft, but we're American. And so we really can't claim British in this particular tradition since we were working it here. And I trained and initiated, and then I moved to the other side of the US and I started circling with other people. And at that same time, I was taking classes at the Avalon Mystery School, and I started seeing parallels between the different paths. And everything that was parallel, I was so excited about and I wanted to know more. And so it just so happened that I started writing rituals and we started working together. And then the next thing you know, we had a tradition. And I've moved several times. So we have locations in North Carolina, Arizona, and Oregon. And we have 3 working covens and growing. And we do teach about Avalonian witchcraft, a lot of folkloric magic, a lot of folk magic, a lot of working with both our own physical landscape, but the landscape of the modern day Avalon, which is Glastonbury. And we actually do work with these 2 spirits. There are multiple versions of the stories of both the Lake Lady and Morgan, or Morgana, however you want to call her. So I actually consider myself to be more of an Avalonian versus an Arthurian. And the reason for that is because I don't, I'm not as intrigued by the stories of the knights as I am by the stories of the heroines. And but they still play a really big part, so they're not excluded. And I will say too that we also we're different than some of the other Avalonian traditions out there because we do work with both female or feminine and masculine deities and shapeshifters as well. So we don't just focus on feminine spirituality, but the women of Avalon seem to be the prominent spirits that we work with. And we work with them in many different ways as ancestral spirits, as in some cases like Morgan Le Fay, as a fairy queen. So Morgan Le Fay herself is just a fascinating spirit. And it's really unfortunate that we don't get to know her better. The original text that talks about her, the very first mention of her, is that she is a benevolent healer, that she has the gift of astrology, or the knowledge of astrology, of mathematics, of ointments, of herbs, of healing, and then she teaches these things to her other sisters. So they're very educated women across multiple fields. It also says that she has wings like that of Daedalus. Now, Daedalus created his wings, put them on, took them off, which indicates here not that she has these manufactured wings, but that she's a shapeshifter. And we know that, of course, just from her name, because we have Morgan Le Fay. And so we have this figure that is very liminal. She is in the physical world as a priestess, in the other world as a fairy queen, and many consider her a goddess. It isn't until later into the romances that all of a sudden she becomes King Arthur's evil half-sister. And this has a lot to do with the times, because we have these old poetic texts from the 11th century that just detail things without bias, without opinion. And it isn't until those romances, where all of a sudden the opinion comes in, and women in general are at this point being demonized. If you were a healer or strange or were outside of the box in some way, then you were bad. And so it's my personal belief that this is what happened. That those stories give us clues to who she is, but I like to stick with that original text, the original first impression of her, which is that she is this educated woman that has these skills of knowledge and healing and the other world. Now, the Lake Lady also is another story that doesn't quite fit with the Arthurian versions. And so we have multiple Lake Ladies. Again, the very first story of a Lake Lady has nothing to do with King Arthur. Rather, it's about a young boy. So the short version is that there's a young boy in Wales, and he's out with his cattle or his sheep, and he's a shepherd, and he's with his animals, and he sits down at this lake to eat. And this figure comes out, beautiful maiden comes out of the lake and asks for his bread. And he gives it to her. Of course, here you go. And she says, "Oh, thank you, but it's too hard. I don't like it. Can you bake me some more bread and bring it back tomorrow?" And he says, "Yes." So he goes home, he tells his mom, they make another loaf of bread and they bring it back. And she's like, oh, thank you so much for not making it so hard, but now it's too squishy. Do you think you could make me another one? Now, this is like a story from the 11th century
Sure.
manuscript. This is not Goldilocks and the Three Bears, although it's interesting because I'm pretty sure that that story comes from here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the third day, he comes back with his bread, and it's just perfect. It's not too hard, not too soft. Gives it to her. She thanks him. It's perfect, and she's like, because you've done all this and you've worked so hard, I'll marry you. And so, of course, this young lad is just like, beautiful woman coming out of the lake.
Score.
You're right, exactly. Like, I'm not gonna say no. So he goes home and he prepares and he comes back the next day to marry her. Except this time, a man comes out of the lake and he's kind of like a Poseidon character. He's covered in duckweed and shells and green, and on either side of him are two identical girls. And he says, so my daughter told me everything and that you're going to marry her. And I'm fine with that if you can tell me which one she is. And he can't. And he sits there and he sits there and he can't figure it out. And so then she cheats just a little and she pushes her foot just a little bit like that. And he sees it and he picks her, and that's the one. And so they get married, but she says to him, like, look, here's the deal. You cannot strike me 3 times. Don't do it. So over this story, what happens? He strikes her 3 times, and they're all for silly reasons. One of them is that he asked her to do something. She was slow doing it, so he kind of just like takes her gloves, and he's holding empty gloves and just kind of whacks her on the arm with them. And she's like, oh, you hit me once. So then they go to a funeral where she starts laughing, and he gets really embarrassed and he like taps her shoulder and he's like, stop it, stop it. And she's like, well, I'm like laughing because this person has died and now they are happy and I can see it, like their soul has been freed. And now you've struck me twice. And so again, they go to a wedding, and what happens? She bursts into tears, just sobbing. Same thing, tapping her on the arm, stop, stop, stop. And she's like, well, I'm like crying because this marriage is just gonna basically be terrible and these people are miserable for the rest of their lives. But now you've struck me 3 times. And so, oh, side note, they had 3 sons. So 3 loaves of bread, 3 sons, and 3 strikes. There's those 3s again, and that 9. And so what happens is she takes all of her cattle. So she had this major dowry of cattle that came with her when they first got married, and they all actually came out of the lake. So they followed her out of the lake. And so they had 3 sons together. And after the 3rd strike, she says goodbye to her sons, and she heads back into the lake where she walks down and accept all of the cattle, all of her dowry, and their children, and their children, and their children. And the strangest thing, even the newly slaughtered calf on the hook jumps off of the hook and goes back into the lake with her. And so this is the original lake lady story. And there is a term for these lake ladies in Welsh, and it is the Gwageth Annwn, and it basically means the wives of the underworld. And there's actually multiple folk tales about these different lake ladies. We see the Witch of Loch Island. We see there's another story about one of these lake maidens and a white cow where she gifts him to a farmer. And the same thing happens where this cow basically becomes the main source of food for the entire village, having other babies and giving milk. And for 4 generations of these cows, this happens until the farmer decides one day the cow's old, takes the cow to be slaughtered, and as the axe comes down onto its head, it rears up, bucks, destroys the whole butcher shop, and heads back down into the lake. And at that point, we see the lake lady come out so angry, screeching, and she calls all the cattle back too, all the way up to the 4th generation.
Wow.
And the entire town starves, and the farmer kills himself. So then we see the same type of lake ladies within Arthurian lore, where we have Nimue and we have Vivian, and there's lots of crossover with these lake ladies and Avalonian priestesses, and the swords. Yes. And so it's my belief that these Arthurian lake ladies are the same class of spirits as the original lake ladies. So even though they're not called the Gwagathanun, they are indeed, to me, the wives of the underworld.
Got it. So, you know, I'm really glad that you pronounced that Welsh term because I've seen Welsh spelled out and there's no way I'd get it. So, thank you very
Um,
much for that.
so I took a little secret here is that I knew that I could not pronounce the Welsh words, and I was reading Blodeuwedd. I was reading about Blodeuwedd, and I remember trying to say her name is like Bottlewood, and I just was like, that doesn't sound right. So I
No.
actually went down to the Irish Cultural Center. This is back in maybe 2012 or 2013. And they had a Welsh class. And so for about 9 weeks, I took Welsh. I cannot say much, but what I did get from it was I brought a lot of the terms that I needed to understand how to pronounce correctly, and I had someone help me. So I was like, okay, so I can say my ABCs and my 1, 2, 3s and some hellos and some goodbyes, but can you help me with these? So I learned how to say Blodeuwedd correctly. I learned how to say Gwagathanun properly.
Perfect.
And the lake that the original story is from is called Llyn Van Fach.
Wonderful. Yeah, I went to Wales once, and being a white pasty guy, we went to a pub and I walked up to the counter like I knew what I was doing, and somebody immediately threw some Welsh at me, and I said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but I don't understand what you're saying. Can you repeat that in English?" And they did. And the accent was so heavy, I said, "Okay, I'm American. I'm slightly deaf. Can you please slow that down?" And they were happy to do so. But man, what a thick accent. Anyway, okay, so the first book was about witchcraft. This is about the way of the Water Priestess. What is the difference between, in practice, in modern practice, between being a witch and being a priestess?
That's a really good question. So, this might vary for other people, but in my perspective, witchcraft is very much about creating change, about working with spirits, working for a particular cause and outcome. There's a lot of spirit work. I feel there's a lot of, in my practice, a lot of tools, meaning things like candles or natural things like sticks and stones, and lots of charm craft creation. And it takes on a very folkloric practice for me. My priestess work is in service to the water. So everything that I do as a priestess is thinking of this kind of overall what is the best for the water? What can I do to heal it? What can I do to protect it? What can I do to bring awareness to others? And this whole process, what's happened is I have other people that are like, oh, I'm a water priestess too. Like, I'd like to learn more. And so I have put together a training program. There's a free little fun intro course to take to see if you're interested in it. And then we dive into the deep stuff. But it's really about creating not just a path of water for myself, but about creating different paths of waters or opening the channels to these different ways so that others can also walk the path of water in whatever capacity that means. We have Christian water priestesses, we have Celtic water priestesses, we have like there's so many, and it doesn't really matter what deity you work with or what path you work. There's a lot of Christian mystics that are working with Mary Magdalene and Sophia, and kind of bringing in some of this water magic into that. And so I have created Water Priestess, both the book and the training program, as a non-path specific guidebook. So the path that it's specific to is water. So if you are a Christian and interested in water, or a pagan and interested in water, or metaphysic, or even if you're just interested in water and you don't have any labels, and it helps to do things like learn how to build an altar or a shrine. Now we do have that in Water Witchcraft as well. However, in Water Priestess, I made sure to add the shrine in there because shrines and altars are different. A shrine is actually a place where the spirit lives. It's almost a spirit house where you can then connect with or worship or give offerings. Whereas an altar is an actual working surface or space where you would actually be creating spells or rituals. So I made sure that Water Priestess had shrines in there. But we also talk about doing things like cleansing the temple and raising the temple. And it's my hope that people buy the book, read the book, and become so inspired that they think, oh, as soon as COVID's done, I'm going to start a water circle. I'm going to teach a water magic class at the beach or at my local metaphysical store. Or I've got 6 friends that love water and we're going to get together and just do a water blessing. So it's less of a practice of magic and more about creating tools for others to use to help build our community of water, because it's so strange to me that there's so many books on candle magic, fire, incense, air. I mean, we even have books on birds, just on birds, which again is air, and we have thousands. Like every book that has ever been written on witchcraft includes some type of earth magic. And we had maybe 1 or 2. You know, Sandra Keene's book, Water Magic, was, I believe it came out in 2012. It was one of the first and only. And then we have the Mermaids book as well. So there was like maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 books about water. And I noticed online that our community was growing. Like we started out with like 100 people in a Facebook group, and we have 2 groups now that are over 1,000. Which means that there's a real need and a real community for this type of work, but we don't have the resources. We don't have 1,000 books to just go pick. And so Water Priestess, I'm hoping, fills in some of those gaps and gives people tools to be able to create their own water path.
All right. That is great. You mentioned pandemic in there, and or you mentioned COVID in there, and people will be listening to this or watching this in different times. Currently we're in kind of a secondary lockdown type of situation. Pandemic is still raging across the land, and I know that you mentioned Facebook. You've got your own online resources. And you also mentioned actual physical circles, and to use a different related term, covens, to get together to work as a group, to share devotions as a group, to work magic as a group. How is that working on your end, kind of as an organizer, as a priestess, in this age where we can't get together physically?
It's difficult.
Yeah,
So within Triskel Rose, we have been meeting on Zoom for
right.
rituals, which is strange. It's very strange. The first one, I think, was 3 hours. And I don't think that any of us were happy because it was our first one. And, we were getting used to using Zoom. I'm very much an I'm a little bit more old school and less new technology witch. And so they'd been wanting to do this for years. They'd been begging for years. And I've been like, no, we will be in person for Circle. And so now, like, I don't have a choice. I was like overruled by pandemic. So now we have been meeting on Zoom, which is difficult. However, when it comes to the Water Priestess stuff, for many, many years, actually before Water Witchcraft or Water Priestess were even written, I used to do group water blessings and or protection rituals. But what I would do is put an event on Facebook and say, hey, we're all going to meet on the solstice at our own bodies of water. And so this has been a really good way to work with others through this crazy time. So basically, what we're doing is we're meeting at the same time or on the same day with the same intentions. And sometimes I put little incantations or like loose outlines in the event. And then on that day, we venture out to our own body of water, wherever that is. And we have people in Australia, I've had people in Europe, Africa, um, South America. Oh yeah, we've got a lot of people in South America, Brazil doing them, and then of course all of the corners of the United States, Canada, everywhere. And so we all go out and we do it, and then sometimes we take pictures if we can, and we share them with each other. But it's also just really nice to know that you can uh, be working by yourself but still in conjunction with someone else. And so it's more about divine timing and collective work over a big span of the planet in a 24-hour period. I mean, it should probably be more like a 12-hour period, but that we all are in different time zones. So and when we can do stuff like that, when we can meet at a certain place with a certain intent at the same time, it creates almost an energetic grid. And so for many years I did these. This year we started up again right at the fall equinox because we had all of the fires raging through the Pacific Northwest, and my house was actually in the direct line.
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah, missed my property by 150 feet.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's a blessing.
It's very scary. A lot of people lost a lot, and it was pretty terrifying.
Right.
But I was going through that just right there in the middle of that equinox time, and I was like, "We're not waiting anymore. We're doing it."
Yeah.
And so I started them up again, and we have very specific intentions of clearing energy that is stagnant and clearing the energy of this control and pollution and disrespect for the water, and bringing in a protective and healing element. So, Water Priestess is really about not only serving the water, but walking a path of water so that others around you can benefit and learn, and the water can benefit and be healed.
All right. So I do really, really, really want to get back to the book, but I'm also fascinated by the mechanics of magical practice and service. Once we get out of this, a year from now, we're in between modern plagues. Things are back to whatever passes for normal at the time where you can get together in person. Do you think you'll still maintain kind of that worldwide online uh, presence and practice?
I hope so. I think that it's really important that even it would be my hope that after the pandemic, after we get back to whatever normal is, or I should just say, when we move into a place of being able to move freely without fear of our health, um, whenever that is, whatever that is, it's actually my hope that I continue doing these so that there can be even more people, because there's still a little bit of fear, I think, of getting out and going to do something, because there could be people at the beach. So that's always a possibility. But it's my hope that there's more people that do this. And I actually talk a lot about, I honestly can't remember if it's in the book or not, but I talk a lot about this. If you have mobility issues or you can't get out to a local water source, how you can still work with those local water sources from your home altar. And that's when the technology actually comes in. And shout out to all the young witches who have taught me this technology magic, because I was not talented in it at all. I tell you what, there's these young kids and they're just amazing, and it's their magic is technology, and I just am in awe of it. So shout out to everybody that's helped me with the technology magic, but it actually works. So say that you live near Lake Michigan. but it's snowing, it's way too much snow, or maybe you're sick, or maybe you don't want to go for whatever reason. You can use Google Satellite. You can print out the picture. We know just from basic magic that a picture of a person is a really good tag lock to be able to connect to and latch onto their particular energy signature. So you can do that with water too. And so you can print out things like these images of the body of water, or the names or pictures that you've used from or taken yourself from when you've been there, and use those on your altars to continue working this protection magic or healing magic. You know, a lot of this type of stuff was born during Standing Rock, when I was so mad, when I was just fuming and I could not get in my car and go. I wanted to, but at the time I had a young child and I have animals to take care of, and I just couldn't get in my car and go. But everything in me wanted me to, and I wanted to do stuff about it. And so I started doing stuff about it with magic. I would do things like send protection to the water protesters, or healing if they had gotten hurt, or just to break the whole situation up, to remove the oppressors, give the land back, all this kind of stuff. And really, to be honest, that's probably what really inspired me deep down for Water Priestess in general. It wasn't a conscious thing, but if it wasn't for those things, if it wasn't for being able to watch the indigenous water walkers and some of these other indigenous people that are doing things to bring awareness and protection to the water, I was like, we should be doing that too. We should absolutely be doing that, but within our own framework, within a way that we can work to support our brothers and sisters in other paths that are also in devotion to water. And so this is a pagan version of water walking, with taking it a little bit further of like, let's live this, let's make this so sacred. The conclusion in my book actually has this vision that I would love to see come forth, and that's at least 9,000 working water priestesses across the world, in every corner of the planet, actively working and changing the polluted bodies into clean bodies of water, but also to make the water sacred. I mean, in India, the Ganges is an actual sacred being. Wouldn't that be amazing if all of the water was? Wouldn't it be amazing to find out that Flint has clean water, and that it's also being revered as sacred, so that we can no longer do these things? If we can make water legally sacred, or part of a strong religious structure, then it's going to be a lot harder for people to abuse it without having repercussions. But maybe that's just some dreams of mine. I don't know.
All right. So we've been kind of talking about big picture stuff, historical stuff. I promised listeners that we'd get back specifically to the book. So within the book, give me some kind of concrete examples of water magic and how to express service to the water.
Okay, this is perfect. So one of the ways kind of goes with what I was just saying, and that is this water tending. And so water tending takes on two aspects. One is the sacred waters, and the other is the physical waters. So I actually have a lot of water witches and water priestesses that are in my courses or training, that their offerings to the water is to actually physically go out and clean the riverbank, to become part of river cleanups, or to become part of river restoration projects, and stuff like that. So it's this service to the physical water, but then the spiritual as well. So we also talk about a lot of oracular work, and using water as divination, or using things from the water as divination, in order to also communicate and connect with some of these different water spirits. I also include a lot of rituals, bath rituals, and things like we have a whole section just on Avalon. And in that section, we work a little bit more personal magic, some shadow work, because I know the like I've been talking about this overarching theme of being in service to the water, but we also have to be in service to ourselves. You see, we're made of 70 to 80% water, depending on how hydrated or dehydrated you are. And so what happens is um, we have this water in our body that if we're not taking care of it, then we ourselves are out of balance. And so, shadow work, of course, is an aspect of self discovery and mastery. And working with some of these more nocturnal energies to learn about ourselves. There's a big healing aspect. In fact, there's just an entire chapter on using water to heal. And some of the different ways that you can do that, I mean, there are actual massage therapists, body workers that do different types of aquatic massages. Now, I don't talk about like how to do it in the book, but I do briefly mention that if you're a massage therapist and water is your path, consider aquatic massage. There's Watsu, which is actual water shiatsu, is from what I understand. And then there's other people that they do healing in the water. There's several different people that do this. One of my favorites, she uses like the kid floaties, you know,
Right,
and
right.
you put them on your arms and your legs, and you just float in the water. And she has singing bowls and that float in the water, and she plays the singing bowls around you, and it becomes a energy water bath and healing process. So there are people that use stuff like that or processes like that in order to actually physically and mentally and spiritually heal others. Not quite 100% my path, but like I said, there's so many different types of ways to work water that you can do it in massage. Singing bowls are a really big really big tool for many people that like to work near the water, because that sound, that tonal sound, can also be a really great offering. I'd mentioned before not being able to drive a car into a lake as a votive offering, and so votive offerings actually fascinate me. I became really obsessed with them for a while, and I wanted to know what every votive offering found at every archaeological site was. And I was looking at everything, and we found I found everything from coins and effigies and bracelets and chariots, all that kind of stuff. But in a modern context, we just can't do that. So what can we do? Well, there's the river cleanups or beach cleanups, like I said, but sound, singing, anything that has that high vibration, those singing bowls to kind of help to bring a sacred energy to the shore itself. Water responds to sound. Like we already know that scientifically. Not only does it respond to sound, but it can change its structure based off of the different sounds. Like it actually responds differently to different sounds and different tones. And so by doing things like drumming or singing bowls on that water's edge is a wonderful way to give an offering without having an impact on the environment. Now, I call these positive impacts because the only thing that you're bringing is this positive offering of energy or of cleaning. And then there's other things that you can do. You can take it a step further, protection magic. So I talk a little bit about doing things like um, walking down the river or the shoreline and drawing things like protective sigils or symbols into the sand, or after doing a ritual at the river, taking some of the rocks and creating a sacred protective symbol to leave there, and then to continue doing your work after you've gone. There's also things like you can take little river rocks home. You go and collect the river rocks, bring them back home, take a Dremel or some type of tool. You can do this with driftwood too, and carving protective symbols into those things, taking them back to where you found them and placing them in the water. because at this point you haven't added anything foreign, so there's no paints or dyes or anything like that going into the water. All you've added was your time, your energy, your intent, and now this sacred symbol that is tumbling and flowing within all the other rocks. So I talk a lot about this kind of magic where we work protection and we give offerings in a way that positively impacts the environment.
Okay. So in this particular book, what motivated you to, I mean, you've got the practice that you do personally, you've got a practice that you share with others. And you mentioned that there are scant resources, but what other motivations were there for actually getting all this down into a book, or in this case, two different books that you published with Weiser?
Oh, wow. So I don't know. Get it out there, I think, was just the motivation. Was like there I felt like there were gaps, that we had some information in these other volumes but just not enough, and so I did want to kind of fill in some of the gaps, things that I thought we needed. But there's different motivations for each of the books. The first one, I was just really focused on proving that, so water witchcraft, I was very focused on proving that water magic was a path. And the reason for that is because I personally love traditional witchcraft, and I consider that to be a strong part of my path, especially my personal path. But water magic as a path is not accepted, and it's not accepted in many places, because it's new, it's different. Everybody knows what a green witch is, but why not a blue witch? We have green witch books, we have all these different things, and I actually got quite a bit of flack from some of the online groups. I got laughed at, I got kicked out, and to be honest, I was a little bullied here and there back in years ago when I first said, like, oh, my path is water witchery. Most people would respond with, water witches are dowsers. And that's true, the fact that since the 1500s, the term water witch has been used to describe a person that dowses or uses two rods or a single forked rod to walk over ley lines or where water might be, waiting for the rods to either fork in like this or for the actual V to give some type of dip. I remember doing this with my great grandfather on the farm, and we found a stick, and he showed me you hold both of the sides of the Y in these hands, and then you have this stick pointing out, and that will move whether or not you go over the water or ley lines, different things like that. It's very fascinating. But if you work with water, at this, maybe a decade ago, you were a sea witch. But what happens if you live in the mountains of, if you live in the mountains, nowhere near the sea, and you only work with the spring that comes out of the side of this rock, thousands of miles away from the actual ocean? Well, you're not a sea witch. And there's also this phrase where all water is the same water, and that's not true because you can't drink seawater. And so water is not the same. There are different types of water, and there are different energy signatures in water. And so what happens if you're living in the mountain exclusively working with a river? You're a water witch. You're a witch that works with water. And so I don't know if I coined that term or if I just kind of, I think someone else did, and I just kind of like punched through and was like, this is going to be a thing. And so water witchcraft is really about proving that it's not just that there's little bits here and there, that you can actually have a full path, a full, well-rounded path. You can use fire and be a water witch. Use floating candles, and you can use air in your work as well. It's not about just exclusively working with water. It's about water being your path and then working the different magics. So water witchcraft was just basically about me wanting to really prove that it was not only a legitimate practice, but a historical practice. And I think that I did that. Now Water Priestess doesn't have that at all. There was none of that. I felt like by the time I got to Water Priestess, I had proved that this was a path. But I realized with Water Witchcraft that what I had done was written a book about witchcraft for water witches. What if you're not a witch? What if you're a mystic or a shaman or a priestess or a metaphysic or a light worker or a starseed, like any of these, right? And you don't identify as a witch and you don't really work these folkloric practices, well, there's still a path of water for you. So that's really what this Water Priestess was about, was this non-denominational water path that could be used to inspire others to help create their own. Because I didn't set out to just prove that water witchcraft was a thing. I kind of set out to prove that water, the whole water path, was a thing. And so by the time I got to Water Priestess, I was like, oh, there's some gaps, because I'm very lucky that I had traditional witchcraft training alongside metaphysical training. My teachers were a husband and wife, and he was Margaret Murray style, old traditional goat foot god type of witchcraft. And we also worked that, but was a body worker and a Reiki master. And so I trained with both of them, and they both really influenced me. And so I I feel like this is a little bit more on the metaphysical side. There's no traditional witchcraft in it at all. In fact, there's things that resemble witchcraft, but I framed them in a way that it was not necessarily specifically that. So this is definitely has like a more metaphysical, modern, magical pathway energy to it, if that makes sense.
A little bit, yeah. So it wasn't just things that didn't make the cut in the first book, they got incorporated in the second book. This is more of an evolution since you wrote the other book.
Yes. Now I will say that it is safe to say that there's the section on Avalon did not make it into the other book. That particular one, but when it didn't make it into the first book because I sent too much in, um, I did. I sent way too much in for the first book. I didn't know that you couldn't overachieve on my first one. I was contracted for 50,000 words and I sent in 91.
Yeah,
That's
that's a problem.
so the crazy thing is even that stuff that didn't, like, not that section that was taken out, that chunk that was taken out of the first book, only a chunk of that was brought into this book, which is the Avalonian chapter. But there's a strong Avalonian flavor in both of them because the modern day Avalon is probably the mecca for water magic right now, in my opinion. It's just so saturated in magic and lore, and the White Spring in Glastonbury is just one of the most magical places in the world. And it's amazing because it is one of the only, I think, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it is the only pagan water temple that is active and open and actually working on the planet. Now, I know that in Thailand and Bali there are actual water temples, but I believe that they would fall under their particular religion and not necessarily under the pagan umbrella. But if we're just looking at pagan and our community and our types of paths, then I'm pretty sure it's the only working water temple in the world. Um, but we do have things like Bath in England, which is an ancient water temple, but it's not run as a water temple. It's run as a museum that is a water temple.
Right.
The White Spring in Glastonbury is run as an actual temple. There's at least one or two priests or priestesses there every day. They are active working shrines. It's an experience.
Yeah, the same time we were doing Wales, we blew through Glastonbury on our way there, and I'm I didn't even know enough to stop and hunt that down. So that's definitely on a future thing. My own brush with water magic was interesting. There was a group of magicians who were running a weekend retreat that was focusing on water magic on the mainland. We were out on an island. This is up Maine, and I didn't know what they had going on, but there was a bounty that the sea brought us that was just amazing, you know, kind of one of those once in a lifetime things. And everybody on our end was just amazed at this. And it wasn't until I was doing an interview like this one, either the following week or maybe the following month, that I found out that there had been a group, you know, just across the bay working this magic on their end, you know, and uh, coincidence, yeah, sure, maybe, but you know, I mean, it's really tough to be in this business and believe in pure coincidence at that level. So
Right.
that was just a super amazing, on my end, display of exactly how powerful water magic can be. I should, I guess I need to apologize a little bit. I'm the mean guy on the publishing end of things that tells an editor, no, you can't have 90,000 words. You need to cut that down. And then they make it happen. So I'm glad that it showed up. But, you know, you were talking about green magic and blue magic, and I've got a copy of your book here, and I'm looking at it and I was like, wow, there's a lot of green in this cover. Whoops. So
Hey, that's okay. I actually have them here too. I actually love the way you guys did it because
yeah, it came
I
out
can,
great.
if
I
you look
love,
at them like this, they
yeah,
look
yeah,
really good
yeah.
next to each other on the shelf.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know our designer Catherine probably made sure that there was that cohesive kind of graphic continuity. But boy, green and blue. Okay. So what's the most important thing about the path of the Water Priestess?
Man, okay, so service to water. There's a lot of online stuff, a lot of chatter, and Water Priestess is starting to become kind of popular now, and there's a hashtag for it and everything on Instagram, and I see a lot of like being sidetracked, like, oh, I'm a Water Priestess, but I'm gonna talk about or focus on child trafficking, or I'm a Water Priestess and I'm gonna focus on sex magic. And that's great, but there's one cause for the Water Priestess, and it is the water. And really, it's my opinion, and of course, my opinion only, so take it or leave it, um, that until we really can bring water into a place where everybody has not only the right, but access to clean water to drink, that we really don't have time or energy to be focusing on different things. It needs to be the water. We need to align ourselves with other water protectors or water walkers, and in a way that we can support their work, but also do our own type of work of the same protection, healing, that kind of stuff. So right now, it's all about healing the water, the physical water, and making sure that the spiritual waters also are clean, because what we drink, I mean, that whole that saying, what you know, you are what you eat, but what you drink becomes your energy. That's the water. Like if you're 80% water and you're just drinking, you know, polluted tap water, it's gonna be a problem. So really it's about this finding a good healthy balance between the saving, protecting, and healing the physical waters, and also really starting to focus on what the spiritual waters might be. And every water priestess is going to have a different cause. Some people are going to want to work one on one, some people are going to do things like water healing, and other people are going to do things like big rituals and river cleanups. And even if you're a water priestess solitary, you don't talk to anybody, you don't do your work in front of anybody, the work you're doing is still so important because it's gonna make a difference. Like you said, it's not a coincidence, and you don't know what you do today. Like what you do today can actually make a huge impact for tomorrow. And don't think that it's too small, because enough of us doing small things becomes a great work over time. So the short answer is the most important thing for a water priestess is the water.
Got it. You know, this is it's been great speaking with you. We're right at about an hour, and I think that's a wonderful note to go out on. So, let's see. You've got a couple things going on in your life. You've got the Water Priestess devotion. You've also got the Triskel Rose Witchcraft tradition. Um, I want to give you an opportunity to let listeners know where they can tune in to you, where they can find out more about both the witchcraft end of things and the water priestess end of things. So here's your
Okay,
chance.
great. Okay, so you can find both of my main water focuses at waterwitchcraft.com, which of course is all about witchcraft and magic. And then waterpriestess.com has the free intro to water priestessing, and then we have consecutive courses over after that that you can take. My goal is to help people become confident in their own skills so that they can become the water priestess that they want to be. So most of my water information you'll find at waterwitchcraft or waterpriestess.com. I also spend most of my social media time over on Instagram. That has been a really nice haven for me recently. Annwyn Avalon. I did start up a TikTok, which has been fun. It's mostly just a repeat of everything on Instagram, and I have a presence on Facebook, but I'm just not on there very much anymore. I started a water witch group, and I have several active moderators on there. So there's plenty of people joining that or that are active in there. So if people wanted to join, and then there's the Sea Witch group. I didn't found it, but I was an active moderator for a long time. And then we have our Water Priestess group as well. And I try to like peek in for the Water Priestess and the Water Witch groups here and there, but honestly, I just don't have time anymore to answer everybody's questions. So the best place to get me is on Instagram. I do free card readings once a week, and so it's Wednesday at 11 a.m. And I try and do like at least 1 to 2 watery or witchcrafty content a day. So I try and put a lot on there for people to devour and to inspire them in their own practice.
Well, great. It sounds like you're definitely out there. Thank you so much for joining us on the Weiser Books Radio Hour once again. I very much appreciate you spending time with us, Annwyn.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Weiser Books Radio Hour. Find us online at www.weiserbooks.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.